I'm joined today by Phil Sampson, and we're going to have a short conversation about business in a time of the COVID-19 pandemic. Phil Sampson is a former Royal Marine. He joined the Royal Marines in 1978 from Kenya, working his way up to Commander on operations in Northern Ireland, and he latterly commanded the Commando Training Centre and the Royal Marines Tyne. Following his career as a Royal Marine, Phil served as a counter-terrorism expert during the 9/11 attacks, and he was later seconded to the security service, where he was prominent in founding the strategically important UK Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre. Today, Phil is the Director of Sampson Hall, and he successfully delivers strategy and governance packages into large and small local and international businesses, and has worked in both the public and private sector. For my part at Bluebird Care, we've benefited from Phil's experience for at least 5 years, and he's really helped guide the strategy of our business and our growth. With this in mind, Phil has really kindly agreed to give his reflections on how coronavirus is impacting business and to highlight those essential skills to navigate through challenges that we all face. So Phil, thank you for joining us today. And obviously we're not in person, we're social distancing, we've been very well behaved. And I've just got 3 questions for you. One is to start off, obviously with your career as a high-ranking Royal Marine and within counter-terrorism, now advising businesses, I'm interested in your reflection on the scale and the nature of this crisis.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because this crisis has come at a very different time. I mean, you reflect back and you think about the Second World War, and in the Second World War, the amount of casualties, 75 million in the Second World War, compared with sort of the COVID side of things. And yet people are comparing this with the Second World War and with the sort of outpouring because of the economic impact it's having, I think, more than rather than anything else. And I think part of that is a direct result of the access that journalists have to what's happening and how it's happening, which creates in our modern world often a panic and a lack of perspective in terms of how these sort of issues are going on. You know, to put it into context, when we came across 9/11, there were only 3,000 casualties in 9/11, and yet that changed the world. So in terms of casualties, this is quite significant, sitting between the Second World War and 9/11. But the thing that really has changed it for me is its reach, its ability to stretch right into the countries. And we're talking now about over 213 countries being affected by COVID, and that is global. Even the Second World War didn't affect 213 countries. So there is a real issue there. And it's gone round gradually from one sort of hotspot to another. And we've seen that first in China and then right the way through to Europe and then America and now South America as it warms up. So that is truly global. I think the other thing it's done is actually restrict us more in terms of in our homes and how we live. And that's been quite interesting because even in the Second World War, there's a degree of freedom and choice that there isn't nowadays in terms of people getting out, socializing and having to socially distance and keep themselves safe. So there's been an impact there as well. But then we have the online bit, which has never been in existence before. And I think that's one of the big things that's impacted here. You know, the ability to hear and to see and actually almost feel what's happening around the world, which we never did before. And I think that's made this a far greater impactful sort of situation than the previous ones that we've talked about. So financially, it's going to have a severe impact, and it may have an impact as great as the Second War, maybe a greater one at the end when we come out of it. Second point, in terms of influence, it's impacted on more people, although the casualties have not been as great. It's impacted on more people in terms of their lifestyles and what they've done. And so it's those 2 things that I think have made it as severe as it is for us. What I just hope now that we can get to an end at some stage, because I fear we may not be at the end now by some considerable amount. And I think there's an inevitability to a second wave and what happens there. Certainly globally. It may not be in the UK, but it may be globally.
And so, Phil, you've described there quite a unique set of circumstances, certainly in modern times at least. what skills do you perceive that people need to guide their businesses successfully through COVID-19?
I think the first thing is that awareness, and there are several things that people have had to focus on here. And the first thing for me is purpose. What is the purpose of your business? And is it viable still? And that's a key question that a lot of people have got to ask themselves. There's no point in reflecting and thinking we're going to go back to the same world that we came from, because there is no doubt we're not going to do that. So how do I make my business relevant for the future, I think, is a key bit of thinking that certainly owners and boards need to think about for their businesses. And if they do think about it and understand it, then how do they actually achieve that is key. The next bit is actually making sure that they're financially viable, I think. And that's a challenge for all of us in this time, when you haven't got the surety of having lots of people coming in to your business, and you've got lots of people who are holding tight at the moment with their finances because they're not sure how it's going to happen, what's going to happen, or where it's going to happen. There are those that are obviously having the opportunity to actually make hay while this goes on a little bit, and those in supermarkets and in those sort of online things are actually able to do quite a bit. Care is doing quite a bit as well, and will continue to do quite a bit, and it's important that those industries are supported properly. I think we may have a different view of who's important at the end of this, actually, because a lot of the professions and things like that are the ones that have closed down, furloughed, and actually we haven't had that much issue compared with some of the other things. We're going to have to get back to them, obviously, but the frontline workers who are doing the hard graft are some of the people that we've actually had little respect for in the past in terms of working and the ethos of their work.
And Phil, again, you're describing that really some quite fundamental and potentially long-term change.
Oh yes, I absolutely think the world will be different. The world will be different after this. There's no doubt about it that the technology has come in. I mean, I think Google have described the 20 years of technological advances being done in a couple of weeks, literally almost, in terms of where we are and what we're doing. So because everyone has had to go to working online, and in working online, they've actually got to think about things differently. They've got to think about leadership differently. They've got to think about communication differently. They've got to think about how they work, how they plan differently. And that's a real challenge. And those things, some of those things have been really beneficial too. There are a lot of people who are saying, actually, this has been very beneficial. We can work at home. We can work at home effectively if we've got the right sort of rooms, the right sort of environment to work in. And it's only about 20% of people who think that they've actually, their efficiencies dropped off as a result of home working. So 80% are working at about the same level as they were before. So that's a great sign. And if you think about the money saved in terms of commute, lunch and everything else, and the time saved, people can be far more efficient working from home if they can, and they'll enjoy it. I mean, there are obviously challenges at home that you've got to get over. If you've got children, it's their education, it's entertaining them, looking after them if they're young, and that's a real challenge. And you've also got to make sure you've got space, but that can be overcome with routines. It can be overcome when people understand what's going on, where they are, and what's expected of them. And that's got to be clear, I think, when you're working. So the world will be a different place, absolutely a very different place. But it'll be an interesting place, I think, because I think we'll have made some great advances in this time. So, every cloud has a silver lining. This is a great big cloud, but there is a bit of a silver lining.
I know I didn't prepare you for this question, sorry, but you've mentioned the word leadership in there, and I know you speak to leaders a lot and you coach them and guide them. How is, it's a big question, but how's leadership changing, or what are the key challenges for leaders, do you think?
Well, I think leaders, when you're present, is quite easy when you've got a team around you, because you can watch them, you can see them, you can plan together, you can actually alter the direction instantly if you need to do it. But when you're having to do it online, you haven't got that capability of seeing people at all stages. So the big word is trust. You've got to be able to trust people, and you've got to allow people to get on with things, because they're going to get on with things. You can't sit on their shoulder anymore. You've got to stand back and let them do things. And that's great. And that's very empowering for some people. For others, it won't be. Others need that hand on the shoulder throughout the time to reassure them they're going in the right direction. But not so in all cases. So you've got to be able to judge who you're leading and what their needs are. And if you can do that, that's fine. But the one thing is, and I think we're going to a world where we're far more agile in our leadership and in our development and in our business. And the key thing about that is actually understanding the purpose. Why are we doing this? So leaders have to be extremely clear in what the end state is that they're looking for. And if they can be clear with what the end state is that they're looking for, then people can fit into that and actually support them in achieving that in probably a very effective way, because they've got the freedom to do what they want to get us to where we need to go to. And that was the old-fashioned military style of leadership when I was in the Royal Marines, where we had a thing called commander's intent. So everyone had to understand what the boss wanted us to achieve.
Right.
And then we had the freedom to be able to exploit that as we could, depending on what the environment was, what advantage we could achieve, and how we could use our initiative.
Phil, in a blog that you penned recently, it really spoke to me when you reminded me of a quote, and don't waste a crisis. And you talking quite positively actually about opportunities emerging from the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are, because the interesting thing about a crisis is it forces us to think about through our business and to make changes, to adapt. Otherwise, we as humans are quite lazy in terms of change. We like to stay where we are within our comfort blanket and carry on as normal, because there's no need to change. And if you look at some of the greatest inventions in the world in our lifetime, most of them have come out of the need to do something differently. And that's because of a crisis. So I think a crisis is really important and a real catalyst in terms of change and how we change and how we develop. And we've seen it. You've seen it with IT and home working. It wouldn't have happened this quickly if this crisis hadn't come upon us. We'd still have those, sort of 50-year-olds like me and above who are absolutely stuck in their ways because, I can't work on a computer screen. I don't trust them. I'd rather have a meeting. Get them into a room. I'll talk to them there. We'll have biscuits and coffee and life will be good. But now we've had to do something very different. And actually, we've all come to accept it. And it found it to be quite useful and actually time-saving. So there's one simple benefit. But the question for me is offices. And I think one of the key things in the future is, do we need offices? And we do in some form or another. But what's that form and how do we need it? Because, I think we need a blended thing. Because there'll be people who don't have space at home, who don't have the room to work, who need to come to work and do something away from home. There are others who like to be in an office with other people, and that's where they draw their power from, because they like other people being around them. And both those sort of people need it. But we also need eventually to actually get to a stage where we can get together and plan and do things and actually just eye to eye each other as a team, because doing this all the time can get very difficult. It's interesting how much chit chat you lose by not being together. And that's where a lot of trust and bonds and things are actually formed, not in the meeting itself, but in the periphery of the meeting, where people talk and understand each other and get to know each other's social lives and build trust. And that's quite...
It's one thing that we're doing is when we have our meetings, we have everyone at the beginning says something they're grateful for that's happened at work and something they're grateful for that's happened in their home life, which is a fairly structured way of introducing that chit chat, but it's still, it encourages you to give a bit of yourself into the meeting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's so important, and particularly it's more important now. Because I mean, what the first question any leader should ask in any conversation is, how are you? And ask that genuinely. And often leaders will go straight into, I want you to do this, 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 and this. But actually, that understanding how people are feeling, understanding what their concerns are, and showing some real care for people is key in these sort of times, because you have to care to be able to challenge.
Yeah.
Because if you care enough, you can challenge hard. If people don't think you care, they won't accept that challenge because they won't trust you.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Phil, to close, I wondered if there was a particular quote that you would like to share with us.
Yes, there is. And it's Oscar Wilde, and it's quite simple. It's about being genuine. And I say it to everyone, it's be yourself, because everyone else is taken. Super.
That's a great place to end. Phil, thank you so much for being yourself and for sharing your insight and wisdom to all of us, and particularly to me and our business. So thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Will, and catch you up soon, I hope.
Great.